Thanks everyone for joining me for another episode on the Travel Collective where we share travel stories, tips for travelers, and more. And today I'm joined by Elaine Dixon from ComeToTheSahara.com. We've done a lot of different videos, but today we thought about talking about traveling with a friend. So we wanted to chat about should you travel with someone you already know, maybe some things to think about, how that may or may not affect your friendship. So, welcome, Elaine.
Thank you very much.
So, what are some things I think that have you, I guess, have you traveled with a friend? I know we both have traveled with friends we've known in our day-to-day life. And sometimes, unfortunately, it's had negative consequences. And I'll have to say that too. Has that been something you've experienced?
Well, sadly, yes. So I consider myself a good solo traveler, but I have traveled with, I guess I have to say, an ex-friend now a couple of times. And I think that that is where I learned quite a few lessons about how you should consider who to travel with if you plan to travel with a buddy. So, yes, I did travel with someone that I thought I knew well. And I discovered that when you travel with somebody, it's quite different than just being with them in your own culture at home where everything's familiar, everything's convenient, and you're not living in each other's pocket. It's a pretty different experience once you start traveling with somebody. And if you haven't really thought both about yourself and about that other person well before you leave, you could be in for some unpleasant surprises.
Yeah,
And
I definitely
that's not
agree.
good.
No, it's not good.
Yeah.
And it can definitely lead to losing a friend. And I think
Mhm.
there's a big difference too between a lot of things, you might think about, oh, we'll just try a weekend together. That might be a good idea, but it's also completely different where you're in a country where you know the language, you know where you're going, and you may be each comfortable kind of having your own agenda for the day and meeting back up. But once you're on, say, a group tour and you've made a decision to share a room, be roommates, and now you're with each other maybe 24/7 in Japan or Morocco or even, far reaches of Alaska, places that may be vastly different from where you're comfortable, let's say.
Well, yes, I would agree. And so I think that you've touched on two things there. You do have to know the other person and you have to know yourself. So there's actually two things you have to spend some time looking at there. And then in addition, what about the destination and the trip type? So you have to think about where you're going and why, and whether each of you, let's say there's two of you who are friends, are you equally interested in the type of travel or the destination? So just to pick something, are you both really, really wanting to cruise, or is one of you just trying it out and maybe the other person's more experienced? You know, why are you wanting to do that? Um, do you really want to do that hike? Or is one person a good hiker and the other person is just more interested in the destination, right? And so any difference in the reason each of you has for going to a destination needs to be talked out so that you can identify how you're going to manage the individual differences you have in potential activities. Because on any one of these points, it could be where one person wants to do one thing and the other person does not or even cannot. And so, does that mean the first person is let down because now they don't have a buddy? Or do you really have to be doing every single thing together? Again, that's something you need to negotiate. Maybe you're going to be comfortable if, while one person goes off on the hike, the other person just lazes on the beach. And as long as you're both good with that, you'll have a great time. But if you wait until you get there and discover you have these differences in interest, that could be difficult. That's a hard time to start negotiating. So,
Yeah, it really is. And even meals and costs, that often becomes
mhm.
a source of uncomfort, both people, having those discussions ahead of time. What foods are you comfortable eating? How much money? I mean, one person maybe well, have a fat pocket for this trip, so to speak. So to them, taking the trip and splurging on meals is something they're looking forward to. Whereas meanwhile, maybe the friend or yourself is the one that's like, oh, you know what? I'm really budgeting and I can only splurge maybe once or twice on this trip, not every night. So these are
Exactly.
things to talk through.
Yes, exactly. And so that means that there's a level of trip planning that you both need to be engaged in. And which, in a way, I mean, I don't want to make a big deal about this particular point, but um, if one of you has recently lost a significant other or life partner, either through death or divorce or whatever it happens, if one person then is an experienced traveler and the other is less experienced and is looking for um, a buddy to start exploring the world of travel, you need to think carefully about what that's going to be like too, for the reasons that you've suggested. Do you have the same budget for the same kinds of experiences? Um, at the same time, how did you travel with your previous partner? So, who did all the planning and arranging? And this is important to think about because it's going to show you something about your expectations about power and control in the relationship,
Yeah.
which is a terrible thing to have to talk about. But really, sometimes you get a person who, I like to be the organizer and I'm going to do, and the other person may or may not be happy with that. Sometimes people are. Yes, absolutely. You organize the trip and I'll be happy to just go along. Perfect. But sometimes you can come into conflict when one person wants to organize the whole thing and the other person feels stifled and they want to have some input into some of the decisions around what you're doing and where you're going. And so, again, it's just essential that you have a really good talk about all of that beforehand, which again goes back to knowing yourself and knowing the other person. So, you talked originally about sometimes people want to travel together to save money. They think that they'll save a single supplement, for example, if they
Mm.
travel together. Well, if you're good compatible travelers, if you're going to do well together, that can be a good idea. But on the other hand, if you're on that trip and you start running up against some of these issues where you didn't really negotiate some of these things beforehand, you're going to wish you'd spent the extra money for that private room just to get some separation from this person who's now starting to drive you crazy. If
Right.
you're fighting over the hair dryer in the morning or something like that, it could be something that simple that starts to drive you crazy in a trip. And suddenly the trip itself is no longer so much fun because your relationship problems are taking away from the pleasure of being in this wonderful place, wherever it is.
Right.
So,
And I agreed, Elaine. I think that's a lot of it. A lot of people look to have a buddy share that room, share the expense, but if you haven't really had deep conversations and really feel, I mean, when you're on a group tour and a small group tour, often you're getting up early, you're out all day and just being in new places, regardless of you think, oh, I got tons of energy. It's tiring. Your senses are taking in all kinds of new information. You're experiencing new sights, new smells. You're constantly kind of being aware of new surroundings and people and conversations, and carry that into now your evening where you're sharing a bathroom. You know what? That extra supplement, whatever the cost may be, it may be well worth paying that so you get some downtime for yourself, for stepping back, breathing, having your own evening routine. It's amazing that, what your evening routine is can be completely different from someone else's. Some people need and are used to having the TV on all evening for that sound, or having all the lights on, or and those little things, now you're more tired, you're going to get more irritated. It's not a good combination.
no, it's not at all. And so that really speaks to, again, have you ever traveled with this person before? Or what have you done with that person? So, and if you have traveled, let's say, How was it for both of you? Like, what kinds of stories and memories do you have? Do you speak positively of the same experiences, or maybe one person didn't have such a good time on the thing that you absolutely loved? So you need to reflect back on some of those things and see what you both enjoyed and what you both didn't, and be very clear with each other about that. What worked, what didn't, what did you both come away thinking that it was a great trip, or one of you, and why? Because those are the things to try and figure out in your planning. You also mentioned group tours. So up till now, we've been talking as if you and your travel buddy are organizing your own tour. But if you're joining an organized tour that some other company is putting together, for example, um, to some degree, the fact that the organizing company has taken over much of the control of the activities in the program, that can actually diffuse some of the conflicts that you would otherwise have between yourselves and your travel buddy. But indeed, if you're sharing a room, or going out to dinner, things like that together, it still remains true that you need to know exactly what your routines are. What are your must-haves, and what are you flexible about? I can't tell you how many people I've heard say, shrug, well, I'm a flexible person. I can adapt to pretty well anything. Can you really?
Yeah.
When you start talking to people, sometimes this flexible person is the person who says, well, but I must set the alarm clock or I'll never wake up in time in the morning. Well, suddenly the sound of that alarm going off might be disturbing to the person that you're with. Or must you have coffee before you're coherent? Uh,
Right.
what's your access to that going to be? In some countries, that might not be so easy. Who knows? Um, must you always have a particular seat in a car or a bus? Must you always know where the bathroom is? I mean, superficially, those don't feel like things that make you unflexible. But when you're with a group, those indeed could be things that are make you quite inflexible. So you really have to think very carefully about your own routines and what you really need to be comfortable and what you in fact can be flexible about. And then, of course, it means you also have to know those things about your buddy. So, what are they saying about their must-haves? And can you, in fact, find a way to negotiate that so that you're both comfortable?
Right.
Um,
And if you are joining a group tour, looking at that, I each person taking time to look at that itinerary, because oftentimes even in a group situation there's free time built in, or maybe an evening where you're on your own for dinner. So having that discussion with your quote friend that you both are signing up for this potential organized trip, tour, multi-day experience, how are they viewing that downtime that the two of you are going to spend that time together? You're going to each take a break, and maybe one person has a special interest in spending some time on their own. Having that conversation ahead of time, because you can have hurt feelings if someone's expecting, like, oh, we're going to go to dinner together, and do our thing as a pair, or I want to walk for hours and be out photographing, and the other person is like, "Oh, I want to go see some live music and go dancing."
mhm.
So having those discussions, because yes, people can be flexible and compromising, but day after day, it's eventually somebody's going to break. It's not going to be happy, or someone is going to be disappointed, let down, and it does bleed over into the friendship, unfortunately.
Yes. Well, and you make a good point because sometimes, let's say, girlfriends traveling together on these trips end up behaving like a married couple, where
Yeah.
they stick to themselves and they don't really integrate very much with the rest of the group. And that's okay if that's what you want to do. But again, now suppose that one of you, as you say, wants to do something different, and they've made a connection with someone else on the tour who has a very similar interest, let's say, in some aspect of culture or history or food. And one of you has decided you want to go out for an evening with that person. What does that do to the relationship? Um, if the expectation is that you're going to be doing everything together and in lockstep, and suddenly something happens where one person kind of wants to break that, can you be flexible enough to allow your partner to go off and do something different from what you thought you wanted to do? So there again, you need to have a talk with each other about how you're going to, interact with the other people on the tour. It's true, sometimes you're not going to bond with everybody. That would be too much to hope for. But on the other hand, one reason people go on group tours is with the hope of meeting new travel friends. And for goodness sake, the world is full of stories where people have met lifelong travel buddies on some trip they each joined independently. Well, that's wonderful too. But so that means you have to talk about the degree to which you're going to be open to new people and new experiences on this trip, and that what it is you're really there for each other for is friendship, backup, whatever you see that to be. But make sure that you're both, clear on what you're both expecting.
Yeah, definitely agree. This has been a great discussion. Is there any, I mean, I think we've given some people some thought thinking points. And it does, it means, being honest ourselves with, our own routines, because really looking at our own routines, are we, needing that cup of coffee? Like for myself, if I know I need that cup of coffee, have I looked ahead? Is the accommodations providing coffee? Am I packing my own coffee? And for me, this is why oftentimes, if a girlfriend, even my father, oftentimes having that discussion and knowing like, hey, I'm gonna go down to the lobby and I'm gonna be mindful that you're still sleeping, or, to me, it's worth having paying that. I've traveled with friends recently, and I've had the same discussion come up where they'll say, "Oh, well, let's save some money. It's just a road trip. It's just for the weekend." And I'll be like, "You know what? I really need my downtime. I really need some space. Let's just, get our own room, and we, maybe we each just find something in a price range that's compromising, or a property that's next door. There's ways to navigate that."
Absolutely. No, that's absolutely true. I think the only other thing I would bring up before we close is to consider health issues, and that both of you are equally capable of doing the trip. If one person is going to be reliant on the other for certain kinds of help, does that other person know that and is willing to do it? Or in an emergency situation, are you equally able to back each other up, for example? Again, viewers to this program may or may not have seen other programs, but I organize tours to Morocco, and I frequently find people who wish themselves into a level of capability that they actually don't have. So this is particularly true when it comes to walking tours or climbing stairs, those kinds of things, riding a camel. People wish themselves into a level of capacity that they don't have. And then when they can't do those things, then those limitations end up being imposed also on the rest of the group. And in this case, in the context of our discussion, on your travel buddy. So that's something else that you have to be really mindful of. And sort of related to that, whether you both assess risk in the same way. So under what circumstances do you feel safe or unsafe? If one person feels quite comfortable striking out on their own in the evenings when it gets dark, um, what does that do to the comfort level of the other person who definitely does not want to do that? So again, talk it over. And how are you going to negotiate these differences? Do you have realistic plans for backing each other up if you run into trouble? These things are really important to talk about before you go.
The safety aspect is super important, and I think a conversation that needs to be had. I mean, safety's always been an issue, but we're seeing increased episodes of, in big cities like Barcelona, where I was this summer. I had an episode of, I don't know if I'd call it pickpocketing or simply being taken advantage of, and having a conversation ahead of time. Who's making that decision of, hey, this doesn't feel right, we need to do this, and being on the same page with that. Or, and that can be during the daytime hours too. How are we
Yeah.
managing our cash and valuables. And that is important. If you're going out even for the day, how much money are, being honest with each other before you leave that hotel and really being mindful, because it's really unfortunate when you do end up in that situation. And yes, you can say it's just money, but for sometimes it can be a lot of money, and that was the rest of your cash maybe for the rest of the trip perhaps, and or it can end up being more dangerous, as I've been told. We have been seeing, and hotel personnel have even warned me that in some of these cities, pickpocketing, it's getting a little bit more aggressive. People, trying to take care of themselves and get threatening. And so, how will each of you react in that situation?
Exactly right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Excellent points. Tell everyone, Elaine, where they can find you and your website if they want information
Oh,
about Morocco.
absolutely. So our website is www.cometothesahara.com. So that's COMETOTHESAHARA.com. And I am Elaine, ELAINE, at cometothesahara.com.
Great. And I'm April with the Travel Collective. We are hosting more interactive discussions and web chats. You can find us on our Facebook page, the Travel Collective. I'm trying to post more events, so invite you to check that out, or you can reach me directly at april@jeffsong.com, and I'll put that in the show notes. Thank you so much.
Thank you.